Welcome to our 4-part series on making a 3-piece mold. Yeah, that's numbers. Okay, so we're gonna start off with my little rubber ducky. I've put a lot of mold lines on here, but I've kind of figured out that I'm gonna do the bottom, the side, and the other side. That'll be my 3 pieces. I was thinking about a piece that could come off the back, but honestly, it just got a little more complicated than I wanted to, and I felt like this would actually work out better for what I want to do. So we're going to follow this line down the center and this line down around the base. These are our mold lines that we're going to work from. I'm going to start with the base of the mold first. So we need to embed the bottom of the piece into clay. And it doesn't need to be solid. I just need to make sure that I have a nice wall that's on the surface side of this piece. So basically it needs to go line up right to that bottom mold line and go out as straight as humanly possible. I always like to do about 2 fingers, which we're looking to about an inch and a half away from the line of your mold. Now there's some areas, so I have like the head that's on there, so like the front and the back of my mold are going to be a little bit wider just because there's actually areas in that stick out further. And we'll see how well I can do this. This is definitely a part of the process that you want to spend a good amount of time on. Spending time in this area versus other areas means that you will have a mold that will last longer, look better, be easier to clean, and be easier to make replicas. So spend your time here. You can't be too picky at this point. I want to make sure that when I put this on here, that my mold line, so I did it with a Sharpie, and I want to make sure that I can see my mold line the whole time. I don't want to go under the mold line, and I don't want to go over the mold line. I just want to stay within the line of that Sharpie. I'm using Soldate, but honestly, you can use whatever clay you want. I like the Soldate just because it's nice and easy, and it's cheap. It's just a good all-around clay body to have. Now I'm going to use my rib, so as soon as I get enough clay on there, I can use my rib to flatten out the surface and smooth it out as much as possible. And I want to be really careful to make sure that I have a really clean line right next to the edge. So I'm using the corner of my rib to just really make sure that the connection point between the clay and where it touches the piece is smooth and as close as I can get to like kind of a 90-degree angle as possible. I am allowing the base of this piece to pop up a little bit, and that's going to help in the process of my mold making. The reason why I did the bottom part with that as a 3rd piece is because the bottom part is actually textured. Now, I could have gotten rid of that texture, but this was the point of making a 3-piece mold. But the other thing is that I did actually want to have a little bit, like, this is going to, anytime you add a bottom piece to your mold, it is an opportunity to have a slightly cleaner bottom. And I could go back and play around with that and actually switch out that piece too, if I wanted to try to sculpt something else. But I think it works well for what it is that we're trying to show. On a side note, though, I also filled my rubber ducky with plaster. And I did that because otherwise the rubber ducky, every time I pushed him into the mold, he would kind of change shape. So I needed it to be a little bit more stable and a little bit less movable on that front. So I actually filled it with plaster and let that set up so that now my mold is not, the actual object that I'm taking a mold of is much more stable and isn't really moving around. This would be a lot harder if I just left it the way that it is. Now I'm starting to work on taking off some of the sides too. So some of my sides are too wide, some of my sides are not wide enough. I'm trying to make sure that I'm keeping it level too. Because when I actually pour this, I don't want my duck to be on like an angle or something like that. It's just going to make for a funkier mold. So I want this part to be as level as humanly possible. The other thing that I noticed, like while I'm making stuff, and especially since I didn't embed it, it's not fully embedded in clay. There's a lot of space underneath there, which is fine. But the other thing that happens is while I'm pushing on parts of it, it pushes it down. So that means I had to go back and add it up there. So, it's not like a right or a wrong thing. It's just how you want to work. And if it's working for you, then it's working fine. I would say it's working for me medium. But it's always a question of whether or not my laziness is going to get to me. So just cutting off the edge there. And my sides, it's going to look like I'm going closer to my sides than I am the front and the back. And that's specifically because there's a tail poking out in the back and there's a head poking out in the front. So I need to have a little bit more space there. So I'm thinning out my sides a little bit more because I don't need that much. Like the widest part is already kind of sticking out. I'm also kind of trying to keep it in a square shape because that's what I'm going to be using. So I try to get it somewhere close to the shape that I'm going to need before I actually have to put the boards on. Okay, so let's just check and see how we're doing on our edges. Make sure that I keep it nice and straight. And I can use my serrated rib to just kind of smooth everything out because I think I'm at a good point now. So close to being done. And then we'll use our rib with a nice little angle, go around the side, smooth all of this out. Make sure that my line stays nice and clean all the way around. So I'm just using my fingernail to just clean that up. You don't ever want your clay line to be too high or too low. It's got to be right in the right spot. And I think especially when we're talking about things for like pour spouts and stuff like that, making sure that you keep a really consistent line going all the way around so that it's not waving up and down will make your whole piece just look nicer. I think a lot of times people forget that the mold line is something that you're going to have to deal with for every piece that you cast afterwards. So spending time to make your mold line look nice just makes it so that you will save time on every piece that you cast afterwards. So again, right now I'm just working on evening out these sides so that way when I put the boards on, they're not too bad. In retrospect, I know I could do it faster, but that kind of goes with everything. The first time you do something always takes a little bit more time because you got to figure stuff out. I probably would have just done a little bit more of a solid block to put my little duck in to make it a little bit easier. On a side note, look at how those boards have gone on. So it's basically making a little cross, I guess, but it's always going to be the side of your board that has that little ridge, the clamp that we're going to clamp it to, that's always going to touch the face of another board. And it goes the same way all the way around. A lot of times that's where people get kind of messed up, is that they don't actually put the board on the correct way, and it drives them nuts. You don't even have to use a cottle board like this. You could easily do this with like metal flashing or something along those lines. I like, these are just little plexi cottle boards that I made a while ago. if you have some, and it's because we had extra thick plexi at the time, so that's why I have them. But I found they've been really helpful for small scale molds because they're really easy to clean. The clamps still work on them. Yeah, so. But your coddle boards can be made out of really anything. I think it works better when it's something that easily separates from the plaster, but yeah. So what I'm working on now is sealing the edge of my piece of the clay to the coddle board. Again, retrospect, I probably could have done a better job if I had just done a bigger piece of clay to begin with, but I was running short on clay. And I could have saved myself some time and just literally cut those off to be a little bit more even. But now I'm going to do this for a while. Even if I didn't do this, even if I got it closer, I'd still have to be doing this, but it might take a little bit less time. So all I'm doing is just popping little coils in there and then smoothing them out. Unfortunately, on that process, I'm not doing a great job because now I have to smooth out the rest of the piece that I already did smooth out. I mean, it's an ongoing struggle. But it's generally worth it if you, once you get a nice mold afterwards. Now the last thing that I need to do after I get all of this like nice and smooth and pretty with no crumbs and that sort of stuff is actually put in a little pour spout. So what I'm going to do for that pour spout is just create a nice clean coil and then create that little line on there. That's going to be my pour line. So that's how tall I want the plaster to go up. Also, my plaster, I don't do a lot to get rid of my air bubbles. I mix it up pretty good. I try to get them all up to the top. But then in the end, I just will take a brush and kind of smooth over the inside. So as long as the bubbles aren't touching my piece, it's all good. Now we'll let this set, and you can move on to part 2 of our fabulous 4-part series for a 3-piece mold.